This episode is brought to you by HP Instant Ink. No one is reading your mind, but HP Instant Ink knows when your printer is running low and sends new cartridges before you run out. So you never have to think about ink. For details, visit hp.com/instantink Spotify. Conditions apply.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. We are really excited today to be here to share another author interview with you. We love talking to the authors. And I'm film critic Rachel Wagner, and Bree is here.
Hi, everybody.
And today we have an author who's been on our show twice before, but we've never actually interviewed her, so it's kind of fun. We're talking with Stacey Agdern. And Stacey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's such a pleasure to be here today. I really enjoy coming on the podcast, talking about movies, and now I'm excited to talk about books. So,
yeah, we've had you on the last 2 years covering the various Hanukkah movies, and that's always been really fun.
It's definitely been enjoyed. So,
yeah. Well, since this is your first time doing an interview, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Okay. So, hi, everybody. My name is Stacey Agdern. I'm from a small town outside of New York City. I am an author. I'm a hockey fan. I'm a music fan. And of course, I'm a fan of Hallmark movies. I'm a romance reader for many years, a former bookseller, former romance reviewer. So the genre has been a substantial part of my life for a while. And I'm kind of very proud to be a part of it. So, yeah.
That's great. So did you always wanted to be a writer growing up?
Yes, there's never really been a time where I haven't written stories. It's always what I wanted to do with them. That was the question. You know, I thought it was going to be a thing that I did on the side as opposed and sort of like kept to myself. I never actually thought of that I was actually going to pursue publication, except, you know, life changes, things happen. And you end up deciding that the thing that you were doing for yourself is the thing that you really want to do for the rest of your life. So,
yeah. What books did you grow up reading? Did you have any favorites?
So I actually came to the romance genre late. I was a science fiction thriller reader. Tom Clancy is Without Remorse. I read anything from like Little House on the Prairie to the All of a Kind Family, which was the thing that I loved desperately, to Isaac Asimov books, to Sweet Valley High, to I can't even like the breadth and depth of what I read was kind of basically what I could get my hands on.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't actually come to the romance genre until I was in college, actually.
How did you get introduced to it in college?
So my mom has always been a huge romance reader. Like she's always had her books. Like reading has always been an important thing in my family. And so she was always reading her romance novels as we were reading everything else. And for me, I had this idea that romance novels were solely historical. They weren't something that I was going to be interested in because, again, as I said, science fiction, thrillers, and Sweet Valley High, like none of those, you know, like to me, they weren't romance novels. And then my mom has this habit of putting books on the corner of her nightstand in my parents' bedroom. And between my first and second years of university, she started to be very particular with the titles that she put on that corner of that nightstand. And one day she put a book by Joanna Lindsay on that nightstand. And it was the story of an archaeology professor, a cursed sword, and the Viking attached to it. And I was like, what is this? All of these things, exactly, like all of these things that I didn't think could exist in a romance novel were in this one.
Yeah.
And it was called Until Forever. And I was obsessed. Again, you know, all of these things that I didn't think romance novels could be were there. And I was like, yes, please give me this and give me more of these. So of course, like the next book that my mother put on that side table was, I think it was an old category of Nora Roberts called Waiting for Nick,
Oh,
which was very close to a situation that I was involved in real life at the time. And so I devoured that one. And then there was a Borders not very far from where my mother was working at the time. And they had one of their 3-for-1 sales. And so of course my mom went in and bought her books. And then very suspiciously, she reaches into the bag and she's like, listen, she's like, I don't know. I thought I was going to like this, but I really don't. Maybe you might like it. And of course we know where this is headed, right? Like
right.
we clearly know that this particular title was never a book my mother was going to read, ever. Because what was the title? The Star Princess by Susan Grant. My mother does not read science fiction.
She bought it with you in mind.
Oh, she absolutely did. It was like, I've got her, and now I'm going to turn her into a romance reader for life.
I love that so much.
So,
very skillfully. But she was very skillfully putting those books on the on her dresser set.
It was
I love the Nora Roberts. I found by surprise like a series of 5 of her old categories for silhouette, like intimate moments and desire. The Calhoun sisters or something it's called. I was like, oh my gosh,
yes,
how did I find these? And like all of them, somebody like donated them to half price books and I had to get them.
Classic. Like
Yeah.
the Calhoun's with the matchmaking grandpas, right? No, that
yes.
was McGregor. Oh my God. But like those family stories of hers, those early family books, like are such like cornerstones of the genre, because she's so good at writing families, generally speaking, and you can see where that came from. Like anywhere from like you know, oh God, like brain is not working today, but like the Born trilogy, which I adore to pieces. You know, always they come like it's a little bit of magic, a little bit of family, but they always come from that same place. Like I have been obsessively reading that I actually rebought over the summer. The 2 of the books in the Cordina series, but most specifically a book called Command Performance, about the Crown Prince of Cordina and the head of the theater of a theater company that kind of has his heart. And it's such an amazing story, the tension and like but yeah, like that's where it comes from. It comes from that sort of like mode of family and sort of family heart and angst, and she's just really good at it.
What was your first author that you got super into as far as category romance?
Oh my goodness. The first that I read was, I didn't realize it at the time that it was category, but Debbie Maycomber actually used to write category. And they've been like republishing a lot of her books with new titles. So you don't necessarily know it's an old book. So she was my like gateway into romance. And I came into it late too. I didn't start reading it until I was about to turn 30. So pretty late. But yeah, that's what's kind of fun about it is so many authors that I love now. Like I love Jill Shalvis, and she used to write category romance. So yeah, there's a lot. I love that so much.
I think my first author that I really read a lot of would be Susan Elizabeth Phillips.
Yeah.
She's really good. She's very good. Very dishy. She does a good job.
Yeah, she's known for like romantic comedies, right? Like her rom-coms are when I hear her name, that's what I usually hear. Like you have to read her rom-coms.
Which is probably why I was drawn to it, because I've always loved rom-coms. But you know, I love Sophie Kinsella, but she's definitely more of like chick lit than I would say romance novelist. But But yeah, what do you think appeals to you, Stacey, about romance novels?
So one of the so as I, as you can kind of tell, my path to them was different than most. And because like I like the things that I love about other kinds of stories, the world building of science fiction, like the fast pace of a thriller, like you can find them all in a romance novel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's one of the most fungible genres there is, because the fundamental requirement is such an easy thing to place anywhere. You can do anything with it as long as you have that central couple that ends up together. And it's like, I don't, like you can put it like literally anywhere. And like, as a reader who likes all of these things, to have that beautiful crossover of like a sci-fi romance, a romantic thriller, a time travel, like all of these little elements that I like about other things.
You can find in it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was watching a live show like a year ago, and Beverly Jenkins, a historical romance author, was on it, and
yes,
and she was like, she's like, that's why I love romance authors. She's like, we write everything. And I was like, yes, you do. You will literally find anything in the genre: aliens, time travel, historical, whatever time period, it's there.
I love her.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's part of most people's lives. Most people have some kind of cheesy romance story in your life, like it happens. So I think that it's, in a weird way, actually one of the more like relatable, because like love is hopefully part of all of our lives that in one moment or another.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your path to getting, okay, so you start reading romance in college, and you had always, loved stories and been writing. How did we go from that to now being published? Like what did that journey look like for you?
Definitely not the way I thought it would, that's for sure. So in grad school, I did a lot of writing, tons of it. And when I was studying for my grad school exams, I went to law school. So like studying for those exams, like the easiest thing for me to do was open up like a separate document, make my outlines, make my, exam things, and then sort of open that separate document and dive into a world. And one of the things that happened was that I discovered that I could complete a book, but I couldn't pass the bar exam. And so I had a decision to make, like, what was I going to do with myself, knowing that this, that this obstacle of an exam, that I was better at, creating fictional stories, writing romance novels, than, taking this test again. So I had to be practical about things. I ended up working in a bookstore. I was like the romance gal in the independent bookstore, which turned into the romance buyer in an independent bookstore very quickly. Shortly thereafter, I joined a writers organization, met a whole bunch of people. It was wonderful and great, but still nothing was happening. And at the time I was writing, and I still love to write paranormal. I still, I love the world building of that subgenre a lot. And I ended up meeting some very, very close friends who were also hockey fans, and who were also romance writers. So there was Sandra Carr from Buffalo and Isabel Kelly from Queens, and the three of us self-published in, I want to say 2010, an anthology of hockey romances. And that was the first fiction that I'd actually had published, which was kind of amazing and wonderful. And so one of the things I learned from that was how much I really loved anthologies. I loved working, and I loved collaborating with other people. So like, I was offered an opportunity to do an anthology with HarperCollins Avon in 2015, which was the first traditionally published anthology of Hanukkah stories. And by about 2017, I had been involved in 2 hockey anthologies, the Hanukkah anthology, the historical romance anthology, and 4 like really angsty, really heavy political anthologies. And friends of mine were like, what are you doing? You really have to do something of your own. It's time. Like, no more anthologies, no more collaborating. You have to stop.
Right. I'm like, where's the paranormal? I love paranormal.
They're under the bed. They're waiting.
Okay.
Anthology. I needed a brain break. It was 2017. My brain was just like full of angst and mess. And I started watching. That was when I started heavily watching Hallmark movies. The joy, the happiness of Hallmark movies. And I was like, what if?
Yeah.
What if this was a Hanukkah story? What if the characters were Jewish? What if? And all of my what ifs turned into a book I queer, like, and again, I'd done this before with different other stories. I edited and then queried out all of it. I wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, because again, the business is fungible. The business is wild, and what happens basically when you throw spaghetti up against the wall. And yeah, I tried, querying a Hanukkah story before, but nothing happened with it. When I got the offer from Thule and then my agent followed, it was kind of like, it was a bit of a long, wild, crazy, amazing journey that sort of, basically in my life, nothing ever happens how I expect it to. And that is basically the long and winding road of how I am a published author.
So would you say that you're a pantser or a plotter when you write?
I am somewhere in the middle, closer to being a pantser than I am a plotter. Friends always joke that like my playlist is my outline. And I think that's very much the case, because before I start writing, I think a lot about character. I think a lot about story. I put that playlist together based on a lot of thoughts and feelings that I have that I want the story to sort of evoke is the word I was looking for. Mm-hmm. But I always have to know how we start and where I'm going. But I'm not someone who outlines. If I spend too much time actually like literally outlining a book, it never gets written.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm the kind of person who loves the thrill of discovery, but also I need some directions because I have no sense of direction as a general rule. So,
Mm-hmm.
I am, which is a long and winding road of saying that I am what they call a plantser these days.
Oh,
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, I think you should do a take on like a Legally Blonde kind of story. That kind of to put your so you feel like you put your law school education to use. Make it into a romance novel. I think that would be fun.
And make it paranormal with a paranormal twist.
Yes.
There you go.
So funny story, like the big sort of paranormal piece that's sitting under my bed waiting for me to be a better writer is the story of a paranormal United Nations, because that was the part of law that I was most fascinated about.
Oh,
law
that sounds
diplomacy.
so cool.
That was my that was my obsession. I was the fan of international cooperation. I was the one who did Model United Nations in college. It was, that was my obsession: international law, international politics, and I was deep. And that was how I started. Really, that was the first series that I ever attempted. So
That would be fun. I'm trying to think of what would be a good law school romance novel. I'm thinking, what if you had the guy who falls for the girl who delivers his Postmates while he's studying for the bar? That could be good.
One of the things that especially my first year of law school, so my last name is Agdern, and one of the things about law school that I loved to pieces was that, so even though you sat like in your first year, you sit alphabetically, and yes, you know, I was stuck at the front of the class my first semester, but the second semester gave me an experience in my life that I had never had before. I got to sit in the back.
Oh,
in an
nice.
alphabetically assigned situation.
Oh, wow.
It was like the best feeling ever. And I feel like if I'm ever going to write something about law school, it's that sort of switched flop expectation of someone who's used to sitting in the back, who's forced to sit in the front, and someone who's, you know what I mean? Like who's when you say alphabetical order, like A to Z kind of thing, that fascinates me. Like what sort of the idea of like butting heads as you sort of change your expectations, both about law and life, basically, through the course of the sword. So.
Yeah, not the Socratic method, the romantic method.
Exactly.
Oh, so the characters have been Jewish in the books.
Yes.
And then also that you have a hockey reference. And have you always loved hockey?
One of the other things that I really picked up my first year at university, so I went to university in Canada. My family has always been hockey fans. I think about my grandfather who like tells stories about like, who told, I should say, stories about the early days of Madison Square Garden in New York and the sort of early days of the team of the Rangers. The Rangers is my favorite hockey team, I should mention. My first year of university, I was in Montreal, and there were a couple of things that I picked up that I grabbed onto heavily because they reminded me of home. A lot of them, most of them were media. One was The Nanny. One was Seinfeld. One was the fact that both Beverly Hills 90210 and Saved by the Bell graduated the same year that I did. And the other, and the last of them was hockey. I could watch hockey in Canada with a bunch of gals, you know, like Monday night, you know, whatever night, hockey night Canada was, we could watch the television, and I could, in my head, remember that my family was probably watching at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how it started, like making friends in this, but, you know, sort of with ties to the things that I did back home. And that was the year that the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. Like, my first big year as a hockey fan was the year the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. There is no turning back from that ever. So, or at least there was not for me, at least.
Nice.
So it's, you know, hockey and music are huge parts of me, and they somehow managed to show themselves in what I write.
That's are you planning on, now that things are reopening, are you planning on going to any hockey games?
So maybe next year we will see how I feel. My favorite hockey team is no longer in the playoffs, and the other one is, the season is over anyways. So we will see, like when the season starts in September. I definitely, I might be watching the Worlds. I might be watching the playoffs. Typically, my team is not in. I'm not going to go to a playoff game this year. I really, you know, when the regular season starts next year, I will reevaluate and see how I feel about being in public again, and then, you know, and then sort of make my choice.
Do you have an ideal poutine?
So,
perfect.
Native New Yorker living in Montreal for 4 years, obsesses over poutine like there's no tomorrow. There's no poutine here. The closest I've gotten to poutine here, there was a place in Brooklyn. It's gonna drive me crazy. That was owned by Myland Deli, in the before, that was owned by an alum from the university that I went to, and smoked meat poutine was that they had there was just perfect, amazing, and wonderful. But like, it's one of my favorite things. Like, I have so many memories of like late nights in university when I was at university, and like spending time with friends, just like randomly eating poutine. So
Yeah, like what was that experience like of going to college in Canada? I mean, one of my best girlfriends lives in Toronto, and I've told her like I feel so ignorant because like I know nothing about Canada and it's literally like on top of the States. But like when you hear of people going to college out of the country, they're usually like going to Europe or somewhere like that. And like it's right there. Like, what was that? How did you, and had you always had your eye on Canada? Did you do research and find the school and it was like the best fit? Like, how did you end up there?
So my guidance counselor, my first year in high school, looked at my records, looked at all of the things, and was like, here, and gave me this big, huge brochure. And when I was, and of course, like when you, back in the day, like I don't even know like how they do it now in a lot of ways, but like when I was going, the brochure for colleges, like the course catalogs and stuff, were these huge, like telephone book size, like dictionary size, like 7 encyclopedias stacked one on top of the other sized books that were tenuously tied together. And like when someone puts one of those in front of you for the very first time, that might possibly have things you might possibly be interested in, my eyes kind of like turned like huge, wild, because it was such an exciting prospect. And in the back of my head, that was what I wanted. That was where I wanted to go. I wanted to go elsewhere. I wanted to like, I grew up in a, even though, I grew up, half hour, 45 minutes away from New York City, it's still a small town. It's still, your high school graduating class is probably made of like most of the kids you went to kindergarten with. What you did in kindergarten follows you all the way through.
All the way through, yeah.
And like, exactly, like it's that sort of, it's both the good and the bad of like small town experiences. And I literally was like, I want to go elsewhere. And the idea of placing a border between me and the rest of the town at the time sounded like the greatest idea. And at the time, the fascinating idea of studying modern languages was like, yes, please, let's do this. So thankfully it worked out that my grades and everything were good enough for me to go when I went. So, but I think partially it was like, it was my vision of I am going abroad to study, something that I liked the idea of. And I just wanted something fundamentally different, even though it wasn't, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah. No, it makes sense to me. Definitely when I was college age, I was so ready to get out of my parents' house. And I mean, I'd only lived for 1 year where they were living at the time. And so I didn't have any attachments to the town or the place. And my parents had just had a baby. And my mom was pregnant when I left for college. And and then she had the baby in August, so just before I started my full freshman year. I was just like, I want to get out of this baby world.
Yep.
So was it like culturally anything that you had to get used to? Or, I mean, did it feel like, oh, I'm literally just a couple of hours away from home?
So the funny thing was that, I went to graduate school back in the US. I went to law school back in Albany. And the culture shock between Montreal and like Westchester County was nothing
Wow.
compared to the culture shock between Montreal and Albany.
Mhm.
If I had gone to a school in the States or in a smaller place or something like that, or even like a school not very far from my hometown, like sure, I would have been fine going directly to Albany. But because I lived in a big city for 4 years, there was culture, there was food, there were, you know, there was a transit system, there was all of these things that I fell in love with and got used to. And I got used to the feeling of the city and how you dress doing certain things and how you felt doing certain things. That when I came back to the States for a law school, it was just strange.
Yeah.
You know, it was like I had gotten used to just living in this amazingly cosmopolitan city, and then I came back and went, oh, okay. You know, anything from trying to think of like anything from not being able to get sushi in walking distance, or like things being open for how long, or like the reaction of my classmates to the idea of going out for a drink. Like anything and all of those things simultaneously were for me just surprising.
Because I feel like in a lot of the media we get, whether it's actual romance novels or movies, there's always this like big city versus small town. And that really bugs me. I love small town romances. I do. However, I'm like, I live in a big city and it feels at times like I live in a small town because I stick to really my side of the city, and it's not, you know, it's not terrible. So
like from like it's, you know, I didn't necessarily deal with this so much in history, but I did in Miracles. One of the things that drove me banana pants before I wrote Miracles was this fundamental divide. Drove me absolutely bonkers, because here I've been talking about like the tiny, small, insular bubble nature of my hometown that is 45 minutes from New York City, where people go back and forth all the time. Where like you don't have to choose between them.
Yeah. Well, that's why I always said in Chesapeake, when we're talking about Chesapeake Shores, they act like someone moving like to Pennsylvania is like the end of the world, and nobody can have a relationship with somebody that's in Maryland if they live in Pennsylvania. And I'm just like, that's not the way the East Coast works.
Exactly. Like there's trouble, there's all that other stuff. And like this idea of like sort of separation between the two. It's like, no.
Yeah.
You know, there are, what's the word am I looking for? Like there are ways to have both, which, as I said, I dealt more in Miracles with this idea that like there really is no zero-sum game between the two. You can have both if you know what you're doing. Basically, you don't have to decide.
So what was that like writing Miracles and Menorahs? I mean, this must have been kind of a dream project for you.
Oh my God, it was. It really, really was. It's funny because like Miracles and history are so completely different in terms of like the parts of me they tie into. Miracles is the Hanukkah all the time girl, the girl who grew up like in between, between like the suburbs and New York City, between like all of these things and tied them all together. And like, it's very much a particular part of my personality.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas history comes from the other part, another part of me. It comes from the romantic. It comes from the girl who's like, I love the idea of the impossible relationship. And I want to see more of this a particular type of era of history shown and conversation. And I want to write a guy who is that kind of character. Does that like, it's those different sort of aspects. And also like, I kind of wanted to write a story about coming back and how that feels like, although that's more love and latkes than history, but I think there's some element to it. Sort of like, you know, what happens when you're away.
Yeah, it was really fun. I enjoyed reading it, and it was nice to have sort of that enthusiasm that we see for Christmas in Christmas books and Christmas movies with this Hanukkah theme. It was fun.
I'm so glad you loved, like, I'm really, really glad you loved it. But that was my intention. Like, I wanted to sort of fill it, because Hanukkah is one of those holidays that's definitely a holiday of identity. That you celebrate it, you know, because in a lot of ways in the United States, who you are is what you celebrate in a lot of ways. And that's where that comes in for me. Hanukkah is my holiday of identity. I own, like, I don't remember if I brought the hat on, but I do have a rather large Hanukkah hat. You know, it's a menorah hat, I should say. Because it's
That's interesting that you say that you are what you celebrate. I haven't thought of that.
That makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And maybe that's part of the thing that's been hard about this last year, is that we haven't been able to really celebrate like we normally, you know, it's just like such a way of showing love for people, is whether it's gifts or just attendance at events and things like that. So that makes a lot of sense.
Can I just say that you have both History of Us and Miracles and Menorahs are like perfect covers. Do you have any input of like what your covers are looking like? Are you like kind of describing the book to somebody and then some cover artist brings it to life? Like, or do you have no idea what it's going to look like until it's done?
So I have no idea what it's going to look like. You can, you know, I fill out my fact sheets, and I hope, I pray. I have the art department at Thule is just brilliant. Like, the first one came out of my brain. The second, like, literally like took a scene out of my brain from the book and like stuck it on the cover. And I'm like, and I literally said, you know, the artist that did that, I want them to do the history cover. And it was funny because I gave them a scene for the history cover, and they gave me not that scene, but another scene in the book. And I was like, this is fantastic. I was like, I'm like, yes, this works. This is perfect. You know, you can fill out fact sheets, you can give scenes, you can say, you know, this character looks a little bit like this person, you know, this character looks a little bit like that person, but you never know what's going to happen until you get the cover in your inbox. And I'm just very, very insanely, ridiculously lucky. So.
Well, let's talk about History of Us. That's the new book coming out in June. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what the book is?
History of Us is a companion book to Miracles and Menorahs. It's the second book in my Friendships and Festival series. It's the story of Anna, Sarah, who is the heroine of Miracles and Menorahs, her best friend, who wants to finally curate an exhibit of her own at the museum she works for in New York. She gets the golden opportunity to do so. However, her boss will only let her do this if she collects some important archives, or like important elements of archival history from a rather influential family for an exhibit that her boss is putting together. The problem is The influential family is the family of the guy she just can't quit. So the meddling matriarch of the family decides to hire Anna to curate an exhibit that will go into the wing of the house that they're going to open as kind of a museum, which means Anna will be in Rockcliffe Manor for the summer at the town's summer festival called Summer Days for the first time in quite a while. And around Jacob, who is the guy in question. And since the last time they saw each other, which was 6 months before, did not go well, this is the very last thing she wants. But of course, he can't quit her either. So this is where we start.
Yeah. It was really fun. I liked Anna and Jacob and their dynamic. How did you come up with their characters?
So I have always been a fan of what I like to call the impossible relationship. I've read it in a bunch of different books. Evelyn Vaughn's series for Bombshell, aka Goddess and Her Kind of Trouble, Laura Fleuron's The Chocolate Touch, Kelly Armstrong's A Stitch in Time. Tracy Livesey actually has it in the first book of her Girls Trip series.
Oh my gosh, that one's so good. What is it
Isn't
called?
it? Oh my God. Like it's, she's sent into town to shut down the plant that is that the town's lifeblood. And
their livelihood. They were not happy about her being there. And it's like the mayor or something that
he is the mayor. He is like,
so
exactly. And that's what he wants to be. He doesn't want to be some like ridiculous like candidate for higher office in the state. Forget that nonsense. He just wants to be a mayor. He wants to, carve his wood carvings on the side. He wants to be happy and he wants her.
We'd like to take a second from this episode of the podcast to celebrate our sponsor of this episode, and that is the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast?
Do you want an inside scoop into what happens on the podcast?
Do you want early access to episodes and loads of cool perks?
Now is the time to become a patron of Hallmarkies podcast.
By becoming a patron, you get to access our patron Facebook group.
You can request episodes or even be a guest on the podcast.
And most importantly, any patron can join our monthly movie watch-alongs with stars like Paul Campbell, Natalie Hall, and more.
It's as low as $2 a month to join in and become a special part of the Hallmarkies family.
Please consider, and we will love you forever.
Go to patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
You think about the elements there. You think about duty. You think about family. You think about power. You think about all of these elements that the world is like shoving on top of them to keep them apart. And yet there they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is the dynamic I was chasing with Anna and Jacob. The sort of like childhood friends to lovers to second chance to third chance to can we please get ourselves together for freaking Hades' sake? Like,
yeah. Can we just get a chance?
Exactly. Can we figure this out, please? And the sort of, and that's the dynamic I'm chasing. And so that was one element of it. The second one was the story of Oheka Castle. Oheka Castle is on Long Island. I had been searching for evidence of Jewish history that sort of reminded me of let me step back a second. So when I was 16, I read Stephen Birmingham's book, Our Crowd. It was a book that I'd read as part of my sort of religious, higher religious school education, put it that way. But it blew my mind, because for all of what I had learned about Jewish history, I learned about my specific, path of ancestry. I learned about the Shuttles. I learned about the Holocaust. I learned about the sort of the situation where most media places Jewish history and Jewish culture. And reading Stephen Birmingham's book sort of, as I said, blew my mind completely, because Our Crowd is the story of the 500, I want to say it's the 500, the 100. Anyway, like it's, I don't really remember. I know the Gilded Age, Mrs. Astor had a list of like either 100 or 500 like acceptable, quote unquote, socially acceptable people that like came to her parties and stuff. And so like in a parallel world to that lived this group of Jewish families, mostly sometimes some were Sephardic, some were from, you know, some were German Jews, and Our Crowd was about the German Jews. And I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, what? It's like, these are Jews? Wait, you're kidding me. Glamorous? What? And that sort of image stayed with me. And I was like, this is fantastic. This is wonderful, but no one talks about it. And I remember, you know, years, like comparatively recently, like I love Joanna Shupe's historical, it's about the Gilded Age. And I found Felicia Grossman's stories about the Gilded Ages in the United States as well. Appetites and Vices. And anyway, they're really good. They're from Karina. Set exactly kind of around the same time that Joanna Shupe's books are. So they're very sort of interesting and parallel in their own ways. And when I was talking with a very close friend of mine from Long Island, we ended up talking about Oheka Castle, which is how we end up at Oheka Castle. Oheka Castle is on Long Island in Huntington. It's a rather large house on a hill, and it was built by a guy by the name of Otto Kahn, who came to the United States from Germany. And in like the early 1900s, his house in New Jersey was burned to the ground because he was Jewish. Mm. And he decided that what he was going to do, because he was not a poor kind of guy, is that he was going to build a ridiculously large and fireproof house on Long Island. He built a castle. There are bits of the stories that talk about property regulations where, and I couldn't find, like when I was looking for the specifics of it, but there were times when I heard that part of how he purchased the land was he purchased it in small bits because there were potentially regulations that kept Jews from purchasing larger quantities of property. I could not find it substantiated later, but suffice to say, you know, chased out of New Jersey due to anti-Semitism was enough of a hook in this particular case. And if you search pictures, Oheka Castle is just beautiful. It is gorgeous. And I was like, that's my story. But I was like, wait a second. I was like, I can't, like, I don't write historical. I tried once, it's great, but it's not a thing I can write. So I wanted to use Oheka Castle, which meant the story was about history. It had to be about history. So the characters, which I think is where the question you asked me is the characters. Because I'm actually getting there, I think. So you have an impossible relationship and you have history. Mm-hmm. And you have Oheka Castle, which means one of the characters has to be tied to Oheka Castle, or my fictional version of it. And the other has to be tied to putting Jewish history back into the narrative, tied to telling the stories of Jews that people don't always think about.
Yeah.
And that is how, and then I went out from there.
That's great. So would you say that Anna is a lot like you in personality or not like you?
There are parts of Anna that are a lot like me. But like when she is passionate about something, she gets very, 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 very deep into it. She is a wonderful researcher and she has a blast doing it. And that's absolutely the part of her that's like me. But in terms of other things, I'm definitely more of a Sarah person than I am Anna.
Interesting.
I'm also elements of friend number 3, which we'll talk about later. But but yeah, the part of me is definitely like the researcher.
Cool. As part of this story, they're planning this kind of like fake ball sort of thing going on, and there as part of the story, they're planning this ball to go as part of the archive and as part of the hall. And I was wondering if that was kind of fun, especially in the pandemic, to be planning these events and stuff like in the story.
Yes. I mean, like, it was interesting because like when I started the series, like the first book is based on Hanukkah festival, right? I have not ever been to a Hanukkah festival. I have not ever seen one, not to the degree that like history that it exists in Miracles. So I was already on this is an alternate universe situation. So like planning summer days, planning the opening of the historical wing, planning the ball, all of those things were just so much fun to do when I was, writing this book from my bedroom in Westchester County. Like it was great to kind of dive into that story, and it was so much fun.